2007 through 2014 Dodge Avenger with the 2.4 liter engine alternator replacement. I'm Brian Esser from How To Automotive, and I'm going to walk you step by step through the process of changing out the alternator. So the first step is to disconnect the negative battery cable, but on this vehicle the battery is buried down here in the fender well. So where we're going to disconnect it at is right here on the strut tower. We're going to remove this 15mm nut here and disconnect the negative battery cable right here. So I'm using a 15mm socket with my little impact tool here to remove this. Regular hand tools is fine, but impact tools just make it that much quicker. Once you get the outer cable disconnected, you're just going to tuck it off to the side. There's going to be an inner cable, you can leave that connected. Now you're going to want to jack the front of the vehicle up, and if you're doing this at home, use floor jacks and jack stands, and we're going to remove the passenger front wheel. Then we need to remove the clips from the inner fender well, and there's going to be 3 or 4 of these, and we're going to peel the inner fender well back, and then right back behind here is going to be another bolt we need to get to. So we're going to follow around the perimeter here, pulling out the clips. It's pull out only as many as you need to get it where you can peel it back like this. And then if you look up above behind the dryer there, you can see the 10mm bolt we need to get to. So we're going to remove that one also. There also may be a lower panel that's mounted on the bottom skid plate. You want to remove that also. It's held on clips and bolts. Once you get the panels removed, now we have access to the drive belt here. We're going to take that off. You're going to need a 16mm wrench or a ratchet. I'm using a ratcheting wrench here. It's made by Mountain. They're extra long. They're perfect for this type of application. I'll link these up in the description. So you're going to put it on the tensioner and crank it over counterclockwise, and you can spring the belt off. If you're replacing the belt, you can take it all the way out. If you're going to reuse it, I just unroute most of it and then tuck it off to the side and leave a lot of it routed. Here's a diagram of how the belt routes. So don't worry about the routing. You can always refer back to the video. So this idler pulley is blocking access to the bolt on the alternator, so we need to remove it. So we're going to use a 16mm ratchet or a wrench and crack that free and go ahead and pull this pulley off. So your vehicle may have had a shield under here. If it had one, you need to remove that now. So there's going to be some clips and bolts around the perimeter. Go ahead and remove that lower shield so we can get access to the alternator. We need to unbolt and move the AC compressor out of our way. We're going to leave the hoses and everything connected, but we're going to squeeze the little electrical connector here and pull the electrical connector off. So squeeze the tab, pull off, and try not to pull from the wires, pull from the plastic connector because the wires will pull out of the connector. So go ahead and disconnect that. Now we're going to unbolt the AC compressor. So there's a bolt on the top right here. We're going to remove that. Remove the 13mm bolt here and here. So there's 3 bolts in total. You can get ratchets in here, you can get air tools in here, there's plenty of room. So I'm using my Milwaukee M12 ratchet here with a little wobbly extension and a short 13mm socket. So go ahead and remove that bolt, and then you may have to take the extensions off to get to the other ones, but you can get your, like I said, power tools in here if you need to. I will link the ones I'm using up in the description of the video. Once you get it unbolted, you're going to let it drop down. It's going to hang by the hoses a little bit, but what I do is I use a bungee cord to support it so it's not fully hanging on the lines, and I just used it and hooked it into the grill like this. Now we can disconnect the wiring to the alternator. So this little red tab needs to slide back. Sometimes you can do it with your fingers, or it may require a little pocket screwdriver or something to pull the lock tab backwards. Once you get the lock tab pulled back, then you can squeeze the tab on there and it will disconnect. So now we need to unbolt the main power feed going to the alternator. So there's a little plastic cover over it. You can squeeze the tabs and then pull it back like this. And then underneath will be a 12mm bolt or nut. You can go ahead and remove that nut. Now you can take the wiring off and tuck it off to the side. Now looking through the wheel well, we're going to get to the top bolt on the alternator. I'm doing this all from underneath the vehicle, so I'm reaching around the alternator with a 13mm socket, and I'm using a short flex head ratchet right here, and I'm going to crack the bolt free and go ahead and spin this all the way out. Now we're going to remove the 16mm bolt on the very bottom of the alternator. I'm using my ratchet here again to make it work faster. When you're pulling this out on the back side, there's going to be this little nut that may fall off. So you want to reach around the back of the alternator and be prepared for that. So once you get the bolt removed, then you can go ahead and swing the alternator kind of downwards like this. You may have to use a little pry bar and give it a little pry and wiggle to get the alternator out. Once you get the alternator off, you're going to peel the fender well back and then pull it through the fender well. Now we need to match up our new alternator with our old alternator, make sure everything is correct. I will link up the one that I'm using in the video in the description. Now going back in, we're going to go ahead and slide the bolt through the alternator, the new alternator first, and go ahead and start this nut right here. And the reason why is when we go back in, it's just going to hook on here like this. So we're going to pull it over the top, and then we'll hook it onto the mount right there, and then we can position the top bolt and tighten everything up. So as you see here, I'm taking the alternator and hooking it over the top like this, and that makes things a lot easier. So once you got it on there, you're going to rotate the alternator counterclockwise until it lines up with the top bolt. Now you can start the top bolt through the top. Once I got that bolt started, I went ahead and tightened it up. After that, you can go ahead and tighten the lower bolt here. I'm just using my ratchet here to run it in until it's snug, and then maybe about a quarter turn more. So now we can put the idler pulley back on. Before we do, I recommend you put a little bit of blue thread locker on the threads here. This will help prevent it from vibrating loose and coming back off. Go ahead and start that bolt by hand. Once you got it started by hand, then we're going to torque it down. Once the pulley is snugged up, then we're going to switch over to a torque wrench and torque it down to 36 foot-pounds. Now we can reconnect the electrical connector by putting the wire back on, starting the nut, and tighten that down. You want to tighten it down to it's snug and about a quarter turn more, then you can put the electrical connector here on. Once you got that on, you push the little red lock tab down to make sure it's secure, and then put the cap back on so it doesn't arc out on anything. After that, we can take the AC compressor, take our bungee off, and we're going to lift it back up into position and start the 3 bolts. I found it easiest to start the rear bolt first, or the one at the back of the compressor first. So line it up, go ahead and screw that in until it's snug, and then you can start the other 2 bolts. Once you get the compressor's bolts all started, then you can go ahead and run them in until they're snug and tighten them up. I just used my cordless ratchet here to run them in until they were snug, and then gave them about a quarter turn more. After you get all 3 of the bolts snugged up, then you can go ahead and plug the electrical connector, and any of the wire looms that it may have been clipped to that's holding it in place, go ahead and reconnect all that stuff. Okay, now that the compressor is secure and the electrical connectors are reconnected, we're going to move on to putting the belt back on. So we're going to route the belt around all the pulleys. Here's a diagram of how it routed. This is courtesy of Mitchell. So we're going to route this all around all the pulleys. Then we're going to put our wrench or ratchet on here on the tensioner and torque it over to the left counterclockwise and slip the belt on. After the belt's on, then we can take this inner shield and go ahead and put this back into place and bolt it up. So go ahead and start the 2 bolts and tighten those up. Then you can put all the rest of the shields back into place and put the clips back in. After that, we're going to lower the vehicle down and torque the wheels down to 100 foot-pounds. You want to do this in a crisscross pattern. You also want to snug these bolts up before you lower it down. So snug it up, lower it down, then you can torque it down to 100 foot-pounds. Now you can reconnect the negative battery cable and tighten it up. So I tightened it up by hand. I removed it with a power tool, but I'm tightening it up by hand. So I tightened it up till it's snug and about a quarter turn more. You kind of just do it by feel. So now I'm going to hook up a voltmeter to the positive lead right here on the fender well, and then the negative right here also on the fender well, and start the vehicle up and just make sure that my alternator is charging. I will link up the alternator and all the tools that I use in this video in the description. I'm Brian Esser from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching, encourage you to subscribe, invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this. Thank you again for watching.